Thanks for being here this afternoon. I'm John Lenker. I'm a senior sales engineer with Lucidworks, and I've got quite a background in working with enterprise search customers. And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people are hesitant to take the next step in enterprise search because of their perceived inability to measure the return on the investment. So what I want to talk about today is precisely that, so let's get right into it. We're going to cover this in three main categories. The first is motivating factors. Why do you want to do this? The second will be methods and strategies for actually doing it. And the third will be some examples and some detail on those strategies, as well as one real-world compelling example that I really like from an actual current customer. Let's take some cues from Gartner, as they're a pretty big player in this space, as you probably know. These are some quotes I've found on Gartner's insights on the status of enterprise search, or the state of it today, and where they see it going. One of them is, employees spend a significant proportion of their time searching for information they need to complete tasks. So the key takeaway for this particular statement is the time they spend searching for information, not actually working with the information, but searching for it. That's going to be important later. The second, AI techniques can solve a wide array of business problems and generate significant returns on investment, ranging from 20% to over 800%. That's something really significant, but how do you actually quantify it? It's very easy to do in e-commerce, as if you're familiar with e-commerce at all, but if you're not, you're interested in the soft factors of enterprise search, or you think measurement in enterprise search is soft. I'm going to show you how you can think about that a little differently. And then finally, by 2022, information will proactively find more employees more often, thereby providing the insight needed to progress decisions and actions, and reducing reactive searching by 20%. This is something that I think is key for the future of this space. So reactive searching reduction is something that you can actually measure, and we'll cover a little bit of this as we go through the slides. So why do you want to measure this? I mean, is there some compelling reason to measure something that's really qualitative in nature and not necessarily quantitative? I think it is quantitative, and I want to show you why I think you should measure it. First of all, if you've worked in any enterprise space, many of my customers will probably share your experience, at least to a degree, and that is there's a lot of lack of interest and confidence in the user base with enterprise search. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a customer say, our users right now don't feel like they can trust our internet portal, or our intranet portal, excuse me, or they're not just comfortable with the particular search results that the portal provides. A lot of noise, things like that. This ultimately leads to the end users not actually using the solution. So you've spent money on an enterprise search solution. Let's say you've forked over a ton of money for an intranet. People aren't using it. So that lack of use will then lead to further lack of investment. And I've seen this cycle in a lot of different companies. So what do you want to do to counter that? Well, you have to create interest, and you have to create confidence. You have to restore it if it's been lost. And if you've never had it, or if you've never ventured down this path before, you need to create it. Another thing here is to avoid risk. There are so many things that users get themselves into when it comes to an intranet or an enterprise search solution. You want to protect them from themselves. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. You're only going to see the benefit for your end users if they're more productive. So this is where we're actually going to measure the return on our investment, is in the end user's productivity. And that productivity will translate into dollars, as you'll see with our example. And then finally, you have to justify, quantify the benefit of doing this to decision makers in the corporation. So someone is going to make a decision about spending money on an enterprise search solution. You're going to have to convince them that their money was well spent. A lot of the time, this will float all the way up to a high senior level in management, where they really don't care about the intranet itself. They just care about the bottom line that's being affected by it. Let's talk a little bit more about this lack of interest. What happens that I've seen is people become disengaged, like I mentioned, but why do they do this? There are too many sources a lot of the time in a company intranet. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. You have source A for certain types of documents. You have source B for another type of documents. And in order to get stuff from the various disparate sources, you've got to go to each source and go through its UI or its front end to search for things. Also, with that comes along way too much noise. So you might run a search that's very focused. You know what you're looking for. You just don't remember the exact location, let's say. Along with that item comes back 20 other things that are completely meaningless and distracting. I've heard this third item said so many times, if I had $1, I'd be so wealthy. The source system's search is more reliable. So again, back to that initial comment. You go to source A for one thing, source B for another, and so on. People have said, well, if I want to find items from FileNet, I'm going to go to FileNet and search that front end, just as an example. And then I don't trust our company search. That is such a recurring theme. And then finally on this part, the tyranny of democracy. What I mean by that is if you've got a CFO in an organization that runs a search for expense reports, what he's looking for is data about how his people are reporting their expenses and how maybe the company is losing money or saving money, whatever it may be. When you have 10,000 users that aren't the CFO that run that same search for expense reports, they're actually looking for how do I file an expense report? How do I find my past expense reports and so on? So those two completely different searches come out of the same search term, and that's sometimes what happens when you have a very top-heavy organization. That CFO will say, well, I want my search to be the most important, and that would be the tyranny of democracy and enterprise search. We can counter that. And then finally here with this lack of interest is people rely on inadequate tools all the time. How many of you have Microsoft Exchange or you use Outlook every day? How many of you actually search your email folders for things versus going to some intranet or some other portal for search? I know I do that, but I've seen it many, many times before. Also, people will phone a friend, or they'll get on chat, or your Skype for Business, or Slack, or something else, and you'll ask somebody, hey, I need to know this, I need to know that. You'll end up not using a search portal because you think, well, my colleague is more trustworthy, or it's faster. You go to your individual systems, again, the same theme. Source A for one thing, source B for another. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but over half of information workers are interrupted on a regular basis. And I'm sure all of you in this room have been interrupted during a workflow by a number of things, your phone, your boss, an IM, an email. That is something that happens to erode and hurt productivity. So speaking of that, here's another insight from Gartner. More than half, that's where that stat came from on the previous slide, by the way. More than half of global information workers are interrupted from their work a few times or more per month to spend time looking or trying to get access to information. That's a lot of inefficiency. But as you see as this statement concludes, that's an opportunity too. You don't want to just take that and accept it as loss or accept it as damage. You can actually turn that around. And then finally they say here, keyword-based enterprise search engines of the past are obsolete. And this is more along the lines of a knowledge management engine or an insights engine. This is something that's the next level up from enterprise search, and it's a little bit outside the scope of this talk, but it's where the future is going. So some of the things from here you'll be able to take away and move towards that goal. How do you create this confidence? So we've talked about losing it. We've talked about the user base interest and confidence eroding. How do you get it back? You have to show the users that you can trust. They can trust what you give them. So this is something that is, this is a soft factor. This isn't quite quantifiable yet, but there are ways to measure this. There are ways to achieve this. One of which is to have a single entry point. So if you have source A, B, and C, like I've been saying, this is an opportunity for you to consolidate, get all of your sources into one search engine, one index, give the user a single point of entry. That will create confidence for them. You also have to provide for them a reliable rate of refresh and accuracy. So if you work in a business where freshness is important, for instance, news or financial or even legal, document freshness needs to be communicated and demonstrated so that people have confidence in what they're searching for coming back is actually the latest thing, the latest version of something perhaps. And then of course the accuracy, that's eliminating noise. We want a search to actually provide something accurate based on what was searched, something relevant. And then finally, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail near the end, but I want you to show your users what they were using and then what they will be using side by side. And let someone actually see, let someone take a test drive of what you've done to improve their search and show it in contrast to what they're accustomed to using right now. Now that's the user base. What about the people that are pulling the purse strings or making the decisions? You have to show them that they acted wisely in their expenditure. They want to be able to make fewer investments in fewer systems. They want to save money. You want to show them that you're actually increasing morale of your knowledge workers. That is a soft factor, but it's hugely important. If people are unhappy with their search tools and unhappy in their jobs, that will affect someone's bottom line. Again, there's a cost not to do anything. So if you don't act and you take no initiative to change your existing enterprise search, if it's insufficient, there is a cost to that. You have to weigh that against what's the cost to actually make a change. And then finally, the bottom line overall for the company, some of these things that we're talking about will translate directly to that, and I'll show you that at the end. How do you avoid risk? I mentioned earlier, you have to protect users from themselves. Part of this is taking a misspelling in a query, taking something else that users might do wrong, like type a query that ends up in 0 results, and prevent them from shooting themselves in the foot with that. There are a lot of products today that will take care of this for you. One of those is our Fusion product, but spell correction, automated head-tail analysis, which queries aren't working, turn those into queries that do work. You protect users from themselves that way and you save them time. You'll also provide fewer instances of wrong information if you take action on this. So to contrast enterprise search with e-commerce is really what we're doing here. However, there are a lot of parallels that are worth mentioning. So in e-commerce, you measure success by, did someone click on an item in a search result? Did someone add to cart? Did someone buy an item? All of those things you really don't do in enterprise search, but they're not completely disparate from e-commerce. So for example, did someone click on a document in a result? How many clicks, how many searches did they run before they clicked? These are things that you can actually measure in terms of enterprise search improvement. And then finally, managing entropy. And entropy, along with noise as an earlier theme, this is something that just plagues so many enterprise search customers' environments that I've worked with. Just tons of stuff that just doesn't need to be in the index or needs to be cleaned up. We'll talk about that too. So improving productivity involves users spend less time searching, single entry point, protecting them from themselves. This is how you achieve them spending less time on searching and actually working. You give them one source, you make it contextual, and by contextual I mean you make it personal. So you provide more of that knowledge management, that insight engine type of experience, and that is something that will benefit someone. If they have a landing page that's tailored to them, that's something that will save them time. Your salespeople, you want them to close higher. So their current work stream or their current pipeline, you want that rate to go up. This is how you're going to improve their productivity. Knowledge workers, you improve their experience. So what are they doing on a day-to-day basis in searching, and how are they saving time in searching? And our example will point directly at that. And then finally, service engineers, they receive support calls. They need to have at a glance everything about a particular customer or a particular support case available instantly. They need to waste less time searching and gathering that information and have it all very disposable immediately when they're on that case. For your executives, your decision makers, explaining your bottom line is really the most important thing. They want to see the following things. Your rainmakers making more rain, your salespeople selling more, their close rates higher, knowledge workers acquiring more knowledge faster, your engineers building your technical products, building your programs and applications faster. You want your support staff, like I was just mentioning, they need to respond faster to the support cases, be able to see the information more quickly. And that leads to improvement in performance across every sector of a business. How do you actually do this? Okay, you can measure that, you can talk about measuring this all day, but you've got to have metrics to do this, okay? Let's get into the metrics a little bit. I mentioned some of the similarities with e-commerce, adding to cart, making a purchase. In the enterprise search context, did a search result in a click? How many searches were executed before someone clicked on something? How often is someone searching for something and getting nothing back? How quickly is the index refreshed? We mentioned that. How quickly are items found? What's your query response time? Do you have an SLA around query response time? If you don't, consider that. How often are your users interacting with your search tools? Meaning, are they bookmarking items? Are they downloading items? Are they emailing items? And then finally, how often are they actually interacting with search? How many hits on your search portal do you get in a day? These are all things that you can measure with modern tools such as Lucidworks Fusion Insights, but these are things you can measure and actually put to action. Here are some semi-soft factors, not so quantitative, but very important. You want to do interviews with your users. Actually sit them down and say, do you like the old search? No, why not? Okay, here's the new search. Do you like the new search? If so, why? Give me reasons why I made this decision and why it was a good decision. Provide them feedback tools. I'll show you a couple of those. Employ experiments, A/B testing, and then what I like to call the Pepsi challenge. Or, if you're a little bit younger, you might know the Bing challenge, or you might be more familiar with the Bing challenge that Microsoft put out a few years ago. Here's an example of some feedback tools. These are right off of the enterprise search demo that we have for Lucidworks Fusion. But if you notice the top image, there's a do you like this feedback tool. And then it's the same search result in the second image, but it shows the bookmark this. And these are just two examples of what you can do to capture feedback from people. Is this search helpful to them? This is one way you can actually track that. Here's another example of feedback tools. This is from the Fusion Insights application, but this is just an example of query response times. We mentioned that as an actual metric, a quantitative factor that you can use to show that your enterprise search is performing well. This is one way you can look at that, and this is just one of a number of metrics you can see on the side, but query response times at a glance. All right, the Pepsi challenge. So this is where I want you to take your old search portal and your new search portal, should you decide to embark on this journey, and put them side by side. Show users, here's what you're getting now, here's what you would be getting. Run the exact same searches. Don't tell them necessarily that this is old and this is new. They probably are familiar with old, but you can maybe disguise it so they look the same. In any case, let them see which search experience they like better. Do this with your existing and new search centers, of course. A/B testing and experiments. Direct a certain percentage of your traffic to your new portal. So this is something that's also a part of the Fusion product suite, but you can do this even on your own. You can set up an experiment to drive, let's say, 10% of your traffic to your new portal and keep the remaining 90% at your old, and then contrast the metrics from both of those. Okay, so let's get into that real-world example. This is an actual Lucidworks customer. If I said their name, you would recognize it instantly, but they've asked me not to say their name, but I did interview them quite extensively on how they measured this exactly, because they were set out to prove to some decision makers that this money was worth investing, and here's why. They actually recently presented this at a Fusion Day in the US, and they called their presentation Managing Entropy in the Enterprise. So this is their way of cleaning up their disorder and making their search more efficient. They also stated this one idea that I thought was hugely important, and that is they're measuring this in two phases. The first phase is simply getting people to the right information. It has nothing to do with what's coming back. It's only getting them to the right spots. And that is just the tip of the iceberg, but the return on their investment for just that piece was so huge that it blew me away. They haven't even entered phase 2 yet, which is actually delivering that content and improving the relevancy. The expectation they had was that each knowledge worker in this company would save 2 minutes per workday. And that does not sound like a lot, but when you add it up across many workers, especially with the average hourly salary, it comes out to be a pretty big number. We'll see more about that here in a second. Here are the numbers from this example. Again, this is phase 1. This is just getting people to the information. This has nothing to do with relevancy, head-tail analysis, any of that stuff. It's just getting them to the right spots. And by that I mean presenting them with a portal that leads them to information. Forget what the information actually does for them at this point. Now, this is the other thing that really impressed me. Only 50% of their users were rolled out here. This is just half of their user base. They had $50 an hour average salary per worker, and they told me that they had 700 total work hours per day across the user base. Again, remember their goal was to save at just 2 minutes per worker per day. When they computed the numbers after using those figures, they told me they were saving between $650,000 and $700,000 a month, which based on their initial investment in our products equated to an ROI of 15 to 20 times per year, which blew me away. I mean, I really wish I could make that up. I would not make up a number like that. This is an actual number, and this is something that they've invested in that will see that return year after year. It's not just a one-time return. That's all I had. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them real quickly. Yes, sir.
Thanks, John. Very helpful. You mentioned Infusion Insights. We're still on 3.0. I would really assume what's next. One of the things I've been thinking about was a method for extracting signal data to push it into Tableau. Insights, do you have any capabilities to integrate with BI tools?
Yes, it actually does. Tableau, we have a demo of that where we'll take signal data and put it into Tableau. That's actually the prime example of how to export it. So it is there. It will be there in version 4 when you upgrade it. Yes, sir.
So how did, for the example that you gave, how did they measure that they actually did end up saving 2 minutes per day for each knowledge worker?
I really wanted to include that in more detail, but I was so compressed for time. They measured some of those metrics that I was showing you earlier. So, for example, how long did it take for a user to click on a result? How long did the query take to respond? How many no results queries were issued versus something that brought back at least one result, and so on. So they used some of those hard factors that I put up there. I wanted to tie it together. I just didn't have enough time. Anything else? Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your time at Activate. Thank you very much.